I will never forget the day I found out. My wife had been cheating, and the private investigator I hired helped me confront it in the most unexpected way. I had a box sent to her and her affair partner while they were, well, in the middle of things. It sent them into a panic, which, frankly, was the least they deserved. I really hate to be the bearer of bad news, Mr. Bennett, Mark Harrison told me, holding out an envelope with a somber look on his face. Mark had been the investigator I brought in when I started noticing things weren't adding up. As much as I had prepared myself for whatever he found, hearing it was something else entirely. Inside that envelope was a full account of my wife's affair with her old boss, Tyler Simmons. Alongside the report sat a stack of photos and a DVD. I flipped through the pictures but couldn't bring myself to watch the DVD just yet. Part of me already knew what it would show. Still, I figured I needed to see it at some point, face it head-on, as hard as that might be. How long has this been going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark thumbed through his notes to find the exact time frame. From what we uncovered, it's been happening for at least 10 years, he replied. Maybe closer to 12. Looks like it all started around the time your wife was in the running for that promotion. That would have been about a year after Emma was born. I felt the weight of that hit me hard. If it had been going on that long, I had to wonder, were my kids even mine? I tried to shake the thought off, but it lingered. DNA tests were definitely in order. And then, just as quickly, another worry crept in. What about diseases? I asked, almost hesitating to hear the answer. Mark nodded knowingly. Tyler's been involved with several married women besides Megan, he said. You'll want to get checked out. Considering how long Megan and I had been together after she quit working, the thought made my stomach churn. I didn't want to believe she could have passed something along, but there was no ignoring the risk. I skimmed through the report again and noticed Mark had mentioned how Megan seemed clueless about Tyler's activities when they weren't together. The irony of that wasn't lost on me. Just so you're aware, Mr. Bennett, Mark added, clearing his throat, Tyler claims he never intended to break up your marriage. And for what it's worth, they never did anything in your house. I gave a small, humorless laugh at that. Good to know, I guess, I replied. I had hired Mark to install cameras and microphones in our home, just to be sure. At least Tyler hadn't crossed that line. I had met Tyler a handful of times before all this came to light. Something about him always rubbed me the wrong way. He had the looks, sure, but he carried himself with this cocky air that made me want to knock the grin right off his face. Now, I understood where that smugness came from. There's something else, Mark said, his voice dropping a little. Tyler's sister Rachel, she's known about the affair the entire time. Might have even helped them cover it up. That stung a little. I always thought Rachel was decent, nothing like her brother. Clearly, I had misjudged her. Man, I muttered under my breath. You talked to a lawyer yet? Mark asked. Not yet, I admitted. Wanted to get all the facts straight first. Well, if you're interested, I can recommend Laura Mitchell. I do a lot of work with her. She's the best when it comes to cases like this. If you want, I can forward the evidence to her and give her a heads up you'll be calling. That sounds good, I said. I appreciate it. Mark handed me his card, and I tucked it into my jacket pocket. Mind if I give you a little advice? He asked carefully. I nodded. Let Laura take the lead on this. I know you're angry. You've got every right to be, but lashing out isn't worth it. This isn't one of those online revenge stories. It's real life. And you've got 2 kids who need you to stay smart about this. I hear you, I said. Thanks. I paid Mark for his services and left his office, feeling like the last 15 years of my life had been a complete lie. Even though I knew he was right, I couldn't stop the ache in my chest. I sat in my car and let the tears fall for a good 15 minutes before I finally pulled myself together. Once I felt steady enough, I took out Mark's card and called Laura Mitchell's office to make an appointment for the next day. Laura asked me to bring financial documents and other records to the meeting. On the way home, I made a stop at the corner store. I hadn't bought a pack of cigarettes since college, but I grabbed one anyway. After that, I found myself at a bar, beer in hand, trying to drown the hurt for just one evening. I was never much of a drinker, but if there was ever a day that called for it, this was it. You doing all right, man? The bartender asked, noticing me staring blankly at the counter. I glanced up. What do you think? Yeah, I figured, he replied with a sympathetic smile. Wife. For 12 years, I nodded. Sounds about right, he said. I hear stories like yours all the time. I took a long drag from the cigarette I probably shouldn't have bought. Yeah, I bet you do. The bartender chuckled softly. Mind if I tell you something my granddad used to say? Sure, I shrugged. He'd say, I cried because I had no shoes until I met a man with no feet. I let that sink in. Look, I know you're hurting. I've been there. But it'll get better. Just remember, there are folks who have had it worse. Your granddad sounds like a smart guy, I said, managing a faint smile. He was, the bartender agreed. Now finish that beer, head home, and deal with what needs dealing with. No answers at the bottom of that glass, trust me. I nodded. Deep down, I knew he was right. I always found it strange how Megan was constantly in her room when I called, but every now and then, I thought I caught the faint sound of a man's voice nearby. Sometimes, her voice even wavered while we talked. At the time, I brushed it off, but now I realize. If Tyler was there, touching her or getting close while she was on the phone with me, it all adds up. There were also times when Megan came home with the subtle trace of Tyler's aftershave clinging to her clothes. I recognized it immediately because every time I crossed paths with him, that same overpowering scent made me feel sick to my stomach. The only way that could happen is if they were, well, more than a little close. Then came the so-called retirement Fridays. After she stepped down from her job, she told me, they still need me once a week for a few projects. Might involve some travel, too. She always tacked on, it's just business. Like that would settle any doubts I had. Looking back, I can see now, her special skills had nothing to do with business. At first, it was one afternoon a week. But then, one turned into two. Before I knew it, there were weeks she wasn't getting home until 9 or 10 at night. Her occasional work trips became more frequent, stretching from once a month to entire weekends away. Retirement? Huh? All of this had been unraveling over the past 4 months, and yet, Megan acted as if nothing had changed. She was still the same sweet, affectionate woman I married. She laughed with the kids and seemed to enjoy family time whenever she was home. Honestly, I appreciated that part, because I had taken over most of the parenting duties to keep up with her supposed work schedule. I'd been wrestling with this for a while, and that's when I finally hired Mark's investigative firm. I needed to know the truth. Now I had it, and it was worse than I imagined. The only thing left was to figure out how to divide everything up. If this had been some one-time mistake, something she regretted after a night out, I could have swallowed my pride and worked through it. Sure, I'd be angry, but I wouldn't have thrown away everything we built. But this was a long, calculated betrayal spanning over a decade. Someone had to answer for it. I snubbed out the cigarette, drained the last of my beer, and slid a 20 across the counter as a tip for the bartender. With a nod of thanks, I headed out. When I got home, Megan's car was already parked in the garage. I honestly didn't expect to see her there. I shut the garage door, slipped off my jacket, and made my way to my office, but she caught me before I got far. You've been smoking, she said immediately, wrinkling her nose. And I smell beer. Is everything all right, Caleb? No, I replied flatly. It's been one of the worst days I've had in a long time. Her eyes flickered with concern. What happened? Is something wrong? I stared at her for a second, wondering if she was actually worried or just putting on an act. Something, I muttered. I'll be in my office for the night. I'm not really in the mood for company. Is there anything I can do, sweetheart? She asked softly, placing her hand on my arm. In my head, I thought, yeah, undo the last 10 years. Afraid not, I said instead. Oh, by the way, Megan added casually, I'm going away this weekend. Leaving Friday. It was only Tuesday. She was already planning another trip. Again? Didn't you just get back from one? I asked, doing my best to keep the frustration out of my voice. Something came up. It's just business, she said with that same dismissive tone. I crossed my arms. Right. And what about Emma's birthday party on Saturday? Her eyes dropped for a second. I know. I can't get out of this. Would you mind explaining it to her for me? I felt something snap inside me. No, Megan, I said, standing my ground. I'm not covering for you anymore. You missed Erin's birthday last year. You missed our anniversary. Now you're asking me to tell our daughter why you're not going to be there for her party? You explain it. Her face hardened, and she let out a long sigh. Caleb, come on. You're being unreasonable. Am I? I shot back. You supposedly retired months ago after the company sold, but you've been gone more than ever. I think I have every right to question what's really going on. Anything you feel like sharing? She narrowed her eyes. What exactly are you accusing me of? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. How would you feel if the tables were turned? Her silence said more than she probably intended. Megan seemed to ease up a little after that. I see your point, she admitted, but trust me, it's just business. That's what you keep saying, I replied, barely hiding the frustration in my voice. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got things to take care of. You'll need to handle the kids tonight. I walked to my office, shut the door, and locked it behind me. A few seconds later, I heard Megan try the handle. Caleb, she called softly. Please, Caleb, can we talk? Leave me alone, Megan, I growled through clenched teeth. I'm busy. I listened as she sighed and walked away. After a few moments of silence, I sat at my desk and started gathering the documents Laura had requested. But as I shuffled through the papers, my eyes landed on the evidence Mark had handed me. I took a breath, opened the report, and began reading. It felt like I was staring at the life of a stranger. This couldn't possibly be the same woman I had loved and supported for the last 12 years. Eventually, I put on my headphones and pressed play on the DVD. Unless you've experienced it yourself, you cannot understand the gut-wrenching feeling of watching the person you love willingly give themselves to someone else. I did not care how Mark got those videos. All I knew was that any lingering affection I had for Megan evaporated the second I saw her on that screen with Tyler. I watched in disbelief as they embraced, their words cutting deeper than I thought possible. Are we still on for this weekend? Tyler asked, his arms wrapped around her. Of course, Megan smiled, running her fingers through his hair. You know I can't go too long without having you inside me. What about Emma's birthday party? Isn't that this weekend? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, but Caleb will handle it, she shrugged. He's better with the kids than I am. Besides, if I have to choose between a bunch of bratty girls and spending time here with you, I think you know my answer. Tyler chuckled, but his tone shifted. I love having you around, Megan, but you sure he's not getting suspicious? You're supposed to be retired, remember? I've told you already, she said, pressing closer to him. Retired or not, I'm not giving this up. There was a flicker of doubt in his voice. I get that, but remember when we started this? You said if it ever came down to it, you'd choose Caleb and the kids. Do you still feel that way? Megan hesitated for just a moment before answering. I honestly don't know. I've never had to think about it. Tyler stared at her, his hand trailing down her back. I don't know how you've kept him in the dark this long, he mused. If he ever finds out, it's not gonna be pretty. It wasn't easy at first, she said, leaning her head on his chest, but I've learned to keep things separate. I give him whatever he wants at home, and I treat him well. If he finds out, I'll just threaten him with a messy divorce. Tyler's expression hardened. It might not be that simple, Megan. If it gets bad, I'll stay with you, she replied without hesitation. You've said before you like having me around. I do, he nodded. But this could get messy. Tyler, it's been 12 years. If Caleb hasn't caught on by now, I doubt he ever will, she said confidently. How long are you planning to keep this up? He asked, his hand tilting her chin so she looked him in the eye. For as long as I can, she answered without hesitation. Maybe the rest of my life. I stared at the screen for a long time after that. Maybe you'll get your wish. I quietly ejected the DVD and slipped it back into my briefcase just as I heard Megan knock on the office door. What is it? I called out. The kids are heading to bed. Can you come up and say good night? She asked gently. Yeah, give me a second. I shut down the computer, went upstairs, and tucked Emma and Erin in for the night, forcing a smile onto my face. Emma squinted at me, clearly picking up on something. Are you okay, Dad? I'm fine, sweetheart, I said, brushing her hair aside. Go to sleep. I love you. I love you too, she whispered, kissing me on the cheek. Once the kids were down, I went back downstairs. Megan had left a plate of food on the counter, keeping it warm for me. There's dinner if you're hungry, Caleb, she mentioned softly. I'm not, I replied flatly. I grabbed a cigarette and stepped out onto the patio, sinking into a deck chair. A few minutes later, Megan joined me, sitting beside me on the other chair. She leaned over, trying to kiss me, but I turned just enough that her lips landed on my cheek. There was no way I was kissing the mouth that had been on Tyler Simmons. She pulled back, confused. Caleb, what's going on? Talk to me. Please, she pleaded. You seem distant, and I know I don't like seeing you smoke. You haven't since college. Yeah, well, life doesn't always go as planned, does it? I replied coldly. What's that supposed to mean? I shrugged and said nothing. Caleb, please, she whispered. You can tell me anything. I love you. I exhaled a long plume of smoke, staring ahead. It's too late for that. Too late for what? I don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. You're smart, Megan. I'm sure you can figure it out, I muttered. I just need space. But maybe I can help if you let me, she pushed gently. I closed my eyes. Respect my space, Megan. Please. Her face softened, and she wiped her eyes. All right, she whispered, voice cracking. I watched her disappear inside, tears rolling down her cheeks. I smoked 2 more cigarettes before going inside to shower. By the time I climbed into bed, Megan was already lying down, reaching for me beneath the covers. I pushed her hand away, pulling the covers tighter around me. It was the first time in our marriage that I had refused her like that. Caleb, Megan began softly, her voice almost breaking. I turned away, keeping my back to her. Good night, Megan, I muttered. She didn't say anything else, but I could hear her trying to hold back tears. At that moment, I felt nothing. As far as I was concerned, she could cry herself to sleep. The next morning, I got up, took a long shower, and dressed for work without saying a word. I packed my things and made breakfast for the kids, sitting with them until it was time for school. Megan watched quietly from the kitchen, shooting me a curious glance as I grabbed my keys to leave. Do I not get a goodbye kiss anymore? She asked, tilting her head. I hesitated by the door. Sorry, I replied, blowing her a half-hearted kiss from across the room. Love you. I love you too, she said softly. Yeah, same here, I mumbled, stepping outside without looking back. At the office, I tried to bury myself in work, but my mind kept wandering. Eventually, I told my boss what was happening, just the broad strokes. He nodded sympathetically. Been through it myself, he said. Take whatever time you need. Just let me know. I thanked him and focused long enough to get through the day before heading to meet with Laura. Good afternoon, Mr. Bennett, she greeted when I arrived. Laura Mitchell looked to be around my age, sharp and professional with long blonde hair. I noticed a wedding band on her finger. Please, call me Caleb, I said, shaking her hand. And you can call me Laura, she replied with a warm smile. I've gone over the report Mr. Harrison sent. I'm really sorry you're dealing with this. It's not uncommon in my line of work, but I know that doesn't make it any easier. How are you holding up? I let out a heavy breath. Honestly, not great. She nodded. Understandable. Have you confronted Megan about it yet? Not directly. I wasn't exactly kind to her last night, though, I admitted. Laura folded her hands on the desk. I'd recommend keeping things civil for now. I know it's difficult, but the less she suspects, the smoother this will go. Let her think everything is normal. When the papers are served, that's when the reality will hit. I know you're right, but it's going to be hard, I said, rubbing the back of my neck. Divorces like this are never easy, Laura agreed. Now, what are your priorities here? What do you want out of this? I want as much as I can get, especially custody of the kids, if they're actually mine, I added quietly. Laura raised an eyebrow. You do realize the courts typically favor mothers in custody battles, right? I've been the one raising them for the past decade, I countered. And Megan admitted on video that I'm better with them. She chose to spend the weekend with Tyler instead of being at Emma's birthday party. That has to mean something. It does, and we can use that, Laura said, jotting down notes. She flipped through the financial documents I had brought. It looks like Megan made a considerable sum when her company sold. The monthly dividends alone match your salary. This actually works in your favor. No spousal support? I asked, hopeful. Or very little, Laura confirmed. She's still employable, and if you're awarded custody, we may even pursue child support from her. What about the house? I pressed. If you get custody, you'll likely remain in the house. Megan might be required to cover half the mortgage, she explained. However, if custody goes to her, you'll be on the hook for half, plus child support. And if neither of us gets full custody? I asked. We could sell the house and split the proceeds. I nodded slowly, taking it all in. What about Tyler Simmons? I asked, leaning forward. Can I go after him legally for alienation of affection? Laura shook her head. Not in this state, but we can bring him into the proceedings. Sometimes we can push for intentional infliction of emotional distress, but honestly, it rarely sticks. What about his sister, Rachel? She's known about this the whole time. May have even helped them, I added. It's the same situation with her. We can file, but it's unlikely to go anywhere. Do you want me to move forward on that? Yes, I said without hesitation. When can you file everything? I asked. By Friday, she assured me. I'd like Megan served late Saturday afternoon. She'll be away with Tyler. Laura smiled knowingly. A little shock and awe. Huh? I can arrange that. But the process server will charge extra for working on Saturday. That's fine, I replied. Let's do it. Laura handed me a retainer form, which I signed and returned with a check. As we shook hands, she offered one last piece of advice. Try not to do anything impulsive, Caleb. Let me handle this. I will, I promised, though I wasn't entirely sure I could keep that vow. When I pulled into the driveway later that evening, Megan's car was already in the garage. It surprised me. Normally she stayed late at the office. I felt the hood. Warm. She had driven somewhere that afternoon. As I walked inside, the scent of pot roast greeted me. Hey, sweetheart, Megan called from the kitchen. You're home early. Everything okay? Yeah, I replied stiffly. I hope you're feeling better than yesterday, she added, setting the table. A little, I lied. I'm sorting some things out. Good. Hungry? I made pot roast, your favorite. I'll have a little, I said, feeling the knot tighten in my stomach. Did you make it to the office today? I asked casually. For a couple of hours, she said, shrugging. Just getting things ready for the weekend. Did you talk to Emma about missing her party? She's disappointed, but she'll manage, Megan replied, not looking up from the counter. I leaned against the doorway. Where are the kids now? In their rooms, doing homework, she said. So, still planning that trip with Tyler? I asked, not bothering to sugarcoat it. Yes. Business, she said firmly. Right. Just business, I replied sarcastically. She narrowed her eyes at me. What's that supposed to mean? With all the time you're putting in, they ought to just add you to the payroll, I remarked casually, not looking up from my plate. Megan smirked, not missing a beat. I'm making more now than I ever did. Doesn't seem like a bad deal. I tucked my briefcase away and changed out of my work clothes. Over dinner, I made small talk and complimented her cooking. As much as I hated everything else, I couldn't deny I'd miss her meals once this was all over. Later, after spending some time with the kids, I retreated to my office and locked the door behind me. A few minutes passed before I heard Megan try the handle. Caleb? Her voice drifted through the door. Are you staying in there tonight? Yeah, I replied, cracking the door just enough to meet her gaze. Still got some work to do. I'm feeling under the weather. Don't want to pass anything to you before your trip. She hesitated for a second, then nodded. All right. Take care of yourself, Caleb. I love you. Yeah. Same here, I said, closing the door before she could say anything else. Once she walked away, I sat down at my desk and began searching online. I found what I needed, filled out the necessary forms, and waited for the confirmation email. When it arrived, I jotted down the phone number and set a reminder to follow up the next day. Thursday played out much the same as Wednesday, except Megan put on a little extra effort, showing up in a sheer nightgown that left little to the imagination. She leaned against the doorframe, giving me a soft smile. Not tonight, Megan, I said without looking up. Migraine. I'll take something and stay in the office. I saw her face fall as a tear slipped down her cheek, but I felt nothing. Not anymore. By noon the next day, Megan called me from the road. Heading out now, she said cheerily. Hope you're feeling better. Maybe we can reconnect when I get back Monday. Yeah. Have a safe trip, I replied flatly. My parents will pick up the kids today and bring them home tomorrow for Emma's party. Thanks for the heads up. I love you, Caleb. I hope you know that, she added, her voice soft. Sure, I said, pausing for a moment. Goodbye, Megan. As soon as I hung up, I dialed Laura. Papers are being filed right now, Caleb, she confirmed. Tyler will be served at 5:30 tomorrow, just like you requested. Rachel will get hers on Monday. Perfect. Thanks, Laura. I left work early, telling my assistant I was done for the day. When I got home, there was still plenty to do before the movers arrived. By 5 p.m., I had a stack of boxes waiting in the garage. The movers pulled into the driveway right on time, and I directed them as they loaded up the truck. While they worked, I sat in the garage, scissors in hand. Megan's wedding dress lay across the table, and I took my time cutting it into neat strips. Once finished, I placed the shredded dress into a paper bag, adding my wedding ring and our torn marriage certificate. I slipped in a short note before sealing the envelope. I handed it to one of the movers along with 2 crisp $50 bills. Make sure this gets delivered to Megan at Tyler's house tomorrow at 5:30 sharp, I instructed. The young man glanced at the envelope, then nodded. Will do, sir. Thank you. That night, I reheated leftover pot roast, watching television in the living room. I slept soundly in the master bed, the space next to me empty. By noon the next day, Megan's parents arrived with the kids. I had been up early, setting up the backyard for Emma's birthday party. The decorations were hung, and Megan's cake order sat in the fridge, waiting for the celebration. You've been busy, Rhonda, Megan's mom, commented as she stepped inside. Didn't really have a choice, I replied, forcing a small smile. I just want the kids to have a good time. They will, she reassured me. Emma mentioned Megan wouldn't be here today. She told you? Rhonda nodded slowly. I can't believe she'd miss her daughter's birthday. Is everything all right between you two? I looked at her for a long moment before shaking my head. No, it's not. You'll find out soon enough. But I'm divorcing Megan. Rhonda's hand flew to her chest. What? Why? I exhaled sharply. I found out she's been having an affair with her boss. For 12 years. Oh my God, Rhonda gasped. George, Megan's dad, frowned deeply. Are you certain? I've suspected for a while, since her supposed retirement. I hired an investigator last month. I have reports, photos, and even video evidence if you want to see. No need, Rhonda whispered, shaking her head. George cleared his throat. I'd like to see it, he said firmly. Sure thing, George. I led him to my office and handed him the report. His eyes darkened as he read. That foolish woman, he muttered under his breath. I'm sorry, Caleb. I know she's my daughter. But this, he shook his head. Now you understand where I'm coming from, I said quietly. What's your plan with this Tyler guy? George asked, flipping through the pages. I've filed for emotional distress, I replied. George scoffed. That's it? 12 years of stealing your wife, and that's all he gets. I know, I admitted, but I have to think about the kids. Ending up in jail won't help anyone. George's eyes narrowed. Let me handle him. I'm serious, he cut me off. You won't go to jail. Trust me. I glanced at him, noticing the glint in his eye. George was a strong man, built from years of working construction. I'd met some of his guys. They weren't the kind to shy away from confrontation. What are you planning? I asked cautiously. The less you know, the better, he replied with a wink. All right, if you say so. George clapped me on the shoulder. Come on, let's get ready for the party. The kids deserve a fun day. We headed outside, where Rhonda had already set everything up. Emma's eyes sparkled with excitement when she came down, and for the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. Why? Tyler asked, already fishing for his wallet. The man inspected Tyler's license, then handed him an envelope. "You've been served," the man said flatly. Megan's hands trembled as she handed over her ID. Moments later, she held her own envelope. "You've been served as well. There's a restraining order included. You must stay at least 500 feet away from Caleb Bennett, his home, his workplace, and his children's school. Violate it, and you'll be arrested. Good day." The man left without another word. Before Megan could process what had happened, another man appeared, holding a paper bag. "Is Megan Bennett here?" "That's me," she replied faintly. "This is for you," he said, handing her the bag. As Tyler accepted a few boxes from the movers, Megan opened the envelope attached to the bag. Her breath caught in her throat. Inside was Caleb's wedding ring, a torn marriage certificate, and a note that read, "Megan, I've loved you for years. I never thought you'd betray me like this. Now, I know better. This is how you repay my love? By lying and cheating? You always told me it was just business, but now I know better. I hope it was worth it. You should talk to a lawyer soon. I've already divided our finances based on the divorce papers, and the locks have been changed. Since I've been the primary caregiver for the kids ever since you started sneaking around with Tyler, I'm asking for full custody, but I won't keep you from seeing them. Have your lawyer contact mine to set up visitation. Since Tyler offered you a place to stay, I sent all your belongings to his house. If there's anything else you want from here, send your lawyer. We'll handle it that way. I don't want to see you, and I sure as hell don't want to hear your lies. If you try to reach out, I will enforce the restraining order. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be, for the kids' sake. But if you push, I'll push back harder. Just so you know, I've got evidence. A private investigator has been watching you for the past month. I haven't told the kids why we're divorcing yet, but I will when the time is right. Your parents know some of it, but not all. It's time to stop pretending and end this sham of a marriage. As of now, Megan, you mean nothing to me. Goodbye. Caleb." Megan's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she pulled the paper bag closer and peered inside. Her wedding dress, reduced to ashes. The same dress she wore the day she promised to love me forever. She collapsed on the floor, clutching the bag as sobs shook her body. Tyler sat beside her, reading over her shoulder. "That bastard," Tyler growled. "I'll talk to him. He's not getting away with this." "No, Tyler, don't," Megan mumbled between sobs. "I don't want you caught up in this. I made the mess. I'll deal with it." "What did I get?" Tyler asked, flipping through the rest of the papers. Megan wiped her eyes, watching as Tyler's expression darkened. "He's suing me for emotional distress," Tyler muttered. $5 million. "I should have known he'd take it this far," Megan said quietly. "Do you think he's going after Rachel too?" "I wouldn't put it past him," Tyler replied, already dialing his phone. "Let's find out." After the party wound down, I stood in the backyard, thanking everyone as they trickled out. The air was cool now, and I glanced around at the aftermath. Wrapping paper, empty cups, and half-eaten cake scattered across the lawn. Emma wandered over, wiping her eyes. "What's wrong, honey?" I knelt down and pulled her into a hug. I wish Mom had been here," she sniffled, leaning into my chest. "I know," I whispered, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I do too. But we'll be okay." Emma nodded slowly, but the sadness lingered in her eyes. "Are you and Mom getting a divorce?" she asked, tears pooling again. I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't how I wanted to break the news, but I couldn't dodge it forever. "We'll talk about it soon, sweetheart. Let's just focus on today, okay? Is it because of that Tyler guy?" Aaron's voice cut in from behind. I turned toward him. "Why do you think that?" Aaron shifted, glancing down. "I've heard Mom talking to him on the phone. A lot?" I frowned, but I left it alone for now. "We'll discuss it tomorrow," I said firmly. "Tonight's about Emma's birthday." Aaron nodded, and Emma hugged me a little tighter. "Everything will be all right," I whispered, brushing away her tears. "I love you both. Don't ever forget that." "I love you too, Dad," Emma whispered back. Rhonda and George stuck around to help clean up. As the last of the guests left, Rhonda gave me a knowing look. "You gonna be okay, Caleb?" she asked gently. "I'll manage," I replied, offering a small smile. Call if you need anything. Day or night, she said. I appreciate it. Rhonda hugged me, and George gave me a firm handshake. Take care of yourself, son, he said before they headed out. I locked the door behind them and went upstairs, exhausted. I collapsed onto the bed, sinking into the mattress as sleep overtook me. The next morning, I woke up to the usual Sunday chores. After breakfast with the kids, Aaron and I worked in the yard, him edging the lawn while I mowed. By noon, we had everything cleaned up and put away. When I walked inside, I was surprised to find Emma at the kitchen counter, carefully assembling sandwiches. Lunch is almost ready, she announced proudly. I smiled and sat with the kids, eating together quietly. But as we cleared the plates, Emma's eyes lingered on me. All right, Dad, she said, crossing her arms. What's the deal? I sighed, knowing the moment had come. Let's sit in the living room, I suggested, leading the way. Aaron flopped onto the couch, and Emma curled up next to him. I took a deep breath and faced them. There's no easy way to say this, I began carefully. Your mom and I, we're getting a divorce. Neither of them looked surprised. It's because of Tyler, isn't it? Aaron asked flatly. Yeah, I admitted quietly. Aaron nodded slowly, as if confirming something in his mind. I kind of figured. She's been talking to him a lot. She talks to him like she talks to you, Dad. Hearing it from Aaron stung more than I expected. I didn't notice, I admitted. I trusted her. Aaron shrugged. I guess I just overheard stuff. I wasn't sure, but I had a feeling. Emma looked up at me, her lip trembling. How long has it been going on? She asked softly. I hesitated for a moment. 12 years, I finally said. Emma's eyes widened. That's almost since I was born, she whispered, tears welling up again. Pretty much, I said, nodding. Damn, Emma muttered under her breath. She glanced at me quickly. Sorry, Dad. I could see the frustration on her face, and I wasn't about to make a big deal out of her language. It's okay, I replied, offering a small smile. Can I stay with you? She asked softly. Absolutely, if that's what you want, I reassured her. Me too, Dad, Aaron chimed in from the other side of the room. You've always been there for us. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. Thank you, guys. That means everything to me. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to let them in on more. Actually, I already requested custody of both of you. Before I could say anything else, they rushed toward me, wrapping their arms around me in a tight hug. I held them close, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't much, but knowing they wanted to stay with me gave me strength. After that, we tried to go about our day, but the weight of everything hung in the air. There was no denying the sadness in the house, even as we did our best to push forward. The next few days passed quietly. George and Rhonda stepped in to help, picking up the kids from school and sticking around until I got home from work. I felt guilty for imposing, but they insisted it was no trouble. Rhonda even handled dinner most nights, which lightened the load more than I could express. On Tuesday, my phone buzzed while I was at the office. It was Laura, my lawyer. Caleb, I wanted to give you a quick update, she began. Megan's lawyer reached out. She wants to see the kids. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a tightness in my chest. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that, I admitted. What if she tries to take them? Laura's tone was calm but firm. We can temporarily lift the restraining order, but only for a set time. Maybe Friday night to Sunday morning? I frowned. Would that be a bad look if I refused? Honestly, it could make you seem uncooperative in court, Laura replied. Being reasonable works in your favor. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. All right, what if she visits them at her parents' house instead? I can drop them off after school Friday and pick them up Saturday night or Sunday morning. I'll pass that along, Laura said. One condition, Tyler and Rachel can't be there. Absolutely, I added. And it's up to the kids. They aren't exactly thrilled with her right now. I'll make sure her lawyer knows that, Lisa assured me. Anything else you're concerned about? I hesitated. What's happening with the PI report? Megan's lawyer requested the full report. I've compiled everything and sent it over. They should have it by Thursday. So, she's lawyered up, I muttered, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Yeah, She hired Beth Sawyer on Monday, Laura said. Honestly, I'm surprised. Beth usually avoids these kinds of cases. I'm guessing she agreed because she's at the same firm as Tyler's lawyer. I shook my head, leaning forward on my desk. Beth Sawyer. Never thought I'd hear that name again. Laura chuckled softly. Yeah, she's a tough one. I'll keep you posted after I speak with her. Thanks, Laura, I said, ending the call. I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone. The pieces were moving, and the divorce was starting to feel more real by the day. The following day, Laura got back to me. Megan and her lawyer agreed to my terms, with the condition that I suspend the restraining order for 36 hours, from midnight Saturday to noon Sunday. The suspension would apply only to Megan, not Tyler or Rachel. They also agreed that Megan could visit the kids at her parents' house and wouldn't take them anywhere. If the kids were comfortable with it, Megan would stay overnight. I agreed. I didn't want to seem unreasonable in front of a judge. The kids weren't exactly thrilled about it, but after some convincing, they agreed to give it a shot. George and Rhonda offered to handle the logistics, picking them up from school on Friday and bringing them back on Sunday. I trusted them completely, even if I had lingering doubts about how it would go. George tried to lighten the mood, suggesting we grab a few beers at Flat Stick Pub on Saturday to catch the game. Friday morning rolled around, and I packed the kids' things for the weekend. After some long hugs, I dropped them off at school and reminded them to call if Tyler, Rachel, or Megan showed up unannounced. Once they were safely inside, I headed to work, doing my best to focus. The next evening, George pulled into my driveway around 5:30. We hit the road, heading straight downtown to Flat Stick, one of our usual spots. Over burgers and a couple of beers, we caught up, the bar buzzing with life as multiple games played across the TV screens. Halfway through my meal, George leaned in. Megan showed up around 9 this morning, he said. The kids weren't happy. Aaron barely spoke to her, and Emma made it real clear she's upset. It was awkward, but she stuck around. I guess she's trying. I raised a brow. Trying? After all this time? She said she still loves you, George added, taking another bite. I think she's hoping for some kind of reconciliation. I scoffed, shaking my head. Not happening. Not after 12 years of lies and cheating. That ship sailed. George smirked. Can't say I blame you. But did you really burn her wedding dress? Rhonda told me that thing cost over $2,000 when you two got hitched. I laughed, leaning back. Seemed fitting at the time. George chuckled, but his expression turned serious. Her lawyer apparently laid into her after reading the PI report. Maybe it's finally starting to sink in. Too little, too late, I muttered. George nodded, taking a long sip of his beer. Suddenly, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The noise of the bar seemed to fade for a second, replaced by a sinking feeling in my gut. Before I could turn around, I felt the sharp crack of a fist connecting with the side of my head. Stars exploded in my vision, and the next thing I knew, I was on the floor, blinking up at spinning lights. Through the haze, I saw a foot coming toward me, and I instinctively rolled to the side. I'm going to end you, you piece of... It was Tyler's voice. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline kicking in as old instincts took over. Years ago, my dad had insisted on self-defense classes, always saying, you never know when you'll need it. I remembered his words just as Tyler lunged again. This time, I was ready. Before he could recover, I tackled him, rage boiling over. I didn't care about form or technique. I just hit him, again and again. For every moment he spent with Megan behind my back. For every lie. For every holiday, birthday, and family dinner he'd sat through while sneaking around. I barely registered the fact that he was out cold. It wasn't until George and another man dragged me off him that I finally stopped, breath ragged and fists still clenched. I heard someone shouting, maybe me, but the words blurred together. All I knew was that for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel powerless. I shifted uncomfortably in the hospital bed, eyeing Megan as she lingered awkwardly by the door. Emma and Aaron stood close to Rhonda, both of them clearly unsure how to react. Fine, I muttered, not wanting to make a scene in front of the kids. You've got 2 hours. Megan took a cautious step forward. I wanted to see how you were doing. I let out a dry laugh, wincing as the movement tugged at the soreness in my ribs. "Oh, I'm great. You know, just another Saturday night brawl with your boyfriend." Her face reddened, and she glanced at the kids. Emma tugged at Rhonda's sleeve, clearly sensing the tension. "Hey, why don't we take the kids to the cafeteria for some snacks?" Rhonda suggested, giving me a knowing look. "I think Caleb and Megan need to talk." I nodded appreciatively. "Thanks, Rhonda." Once they left, Megan sat down gingerly in the chair beside my bed. "I didn't know Tyler was going to show up," she said quietly. "I swear, Caleb, I didn't put him up to it." I studied her for a long moment. "Doesn't really matter, does it? He's been showing up in my life for 12 years whether I knew it or not." She flinched, gripping the strap of her purse nervously. "I didn't come here to fight," she said after a long pause. I wanted to see if you were okay. I know this has been hard on everyone, but especially you." I raised an eyebrow. "Hard? Megan, I nearly lost everything because of you. And Tyler? He sure as hell didn't make it easier. Don't stand there and tell me you care about how I feel now." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing but exhaustion. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't know how to fix this." I leaned back, staring up at the ceiling. "You can't. That's the point. I just want to move on." Silence stretched between us, and I could tell she was holding back more. Finally, she asked, "Do the kids know everything?" "Not everything," I replied. "They know enough to understand why we're divorcing." Aaron pieced it together quicker than I thought he would. She wiped her face, nodding softly. "I hate that I hurt them." "You should," I said bluntly, "but hating it doesn't undo it." She sat there for a moment longer before standing up. "I'll be at my parents' house until noon. If the kids want to see me, I'll let them decide," I said firmly. Megan hesitated, but finally turned toward the door. Before she left, I called out, "Megan?" She paused and glanced back, her eyes hopeful for a brief second. "I'm serious. Stay away from Tyler when the kids are around. If you break that, I'll make sure the visitation agreement is cut to supervised visits only." She swallowed hard and nodded. "I understand." With that, she left the room, leaving behind nothing but the faint trace of her perfume and a weight I could finally start to shake off. Before she could leave, Aaron peeked in, his eyes bouncing between the two of us. "Is everything good?" he asked cautiously. Megan forced a smile. "Yes, sweetie. I was just heading out." Aaron stepped aside, letting her pass. As she disappeared down the hallway, he turned to me, crossing his arms. "She's still trying to play nice, huh?" I smirked. "Something like that." Aaron walked over and sat at the edge of the hospital bed, picking at the corner of my blanket. "Look, Dad, I don't care what Mom says. I know what she did. I'm not gonna pretend it didn't happen," he muttered. I sighed, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to, son. But don't let it turn into anger. You and Emma don't need that kind of weight." "I know," he said, exhaling sharply. "It's just hard." "I get it," I replied. "But we'll get through this, one day at a time." Aaron nodded, looking up at me with a faint smile. "So, did you really knock Tyler out cold?" I chuckled, ruffling his hair. "Yeah, but don't go bragging about it. Not exactly my proudest moment." Aaron grinned. "Still kind of cool, though." Just then, Emma poked her head into the room, followed by Rhonda. "Can we go home now, Daddy?" she asked softly. "Yeah, sweetheart," I said. "Let's get out of here." George stepped in behind her, grabbing my overnight bag. "Let's hit the road, Caleb. You've had enough excitement for one weekend." I eased off the bed, wincing slightly as I adjusted the sling on my arm. Aaron slipped under my good arm, helping steady me as we walked toward the exit. Megan's shadow still lingered, but as I stepped into the cool morning air with my kids beside me, I realized something. We were finally moving forward, without her. George drove me home while Emma and Aaron sat quietly in the back seat. Later that night, I was dozing on the couch when my phone buzzed violently on the coffee table. I glanced at the screen at George. I answered quickly, sitting up. "Hey, George. What's up?" His voice was tense. "Caleb, listen. It's Megan. Rachel found her unconscious at Tyler's place. Pills and alcohol. There was a note. Just said, 'I'm sorry.'" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Is she? She's alive, George reassured me quickly. Rachel got there in time. She's at the hospital now. I thought you should know. I ran a hand down my face, sinking back into the couch. Jesus. She'll be okay, George added softly. They've got her under observation. Mental health's involved now. After she's released, Rhonda and I are bringing her home with us. I nodded to myself, feeling conflicted. I was angry at Megan for everything she'd done, but I didn't want her gone. For the kid's sake, she needed to be here. Thanks for letting me know, I said. She signed the divorce papers, Caleb, George continued. Didn't fight anything. Laura said it'll be final in 90 days. Free. I should have felt relieved, but the word felt heavier than I expected. A few weeks later, Tyler's attorney proposed a settlement, half of what I initially demanded. After legal fees, I walked away with $3.5 million. I put $1 million each into college funds for Emma and Aaron. The rest sat untouched, aside from a little I used to start planning a summer trip, a Mediterranean cruise for just the three of us. I wanted to give them something to look forward to after everything they'd been through. Tyler wasn't as lucky. Thanks to the bar's surveillance footage, he was convicted of aggravated assault, battery, and attempted manslaughter. He was sentenced to 10 years in state prison, eligible for parole in 8.5. I wasn't sure if I'd ever feel justice had been served, but at least he wouldn't be around to ruin anyone else's life for a while. Whenever I dropped the kids off at George and Rhonda's, I'd see Megan. She'd wave from the porch, and sometimes we'd exchange a few words. I could tell she still hoped for some kind of reconciliation. She was in therapy now, writing for business blogs and keeping to herself. From what George said, she wasn't interested in dating. Her entire focus was on getting better and rebuilding her relationship with Emma and Aaron. One day, when I mentioned the cruise to the kids, Megan overheard. I saw the disappointment flash across her face, but she smiled politely and wished us a good trip. While we were away, Emma sent her pictures from every stop, and Megan replied to every single one. I appreciated that, even if the sight of her name on my phone still stirred memories I'd rather forget. Life was moving forward, and for once, I was okay with that. During the cruise, I met Lisa, a charming woman from British Columbia, also on a post-divorce trip. She was a bit younger than Megan, with blonde hair and a cheerful demeanor. I found her habit of ending sentences with oddly endearing. Lisa had 2 kids, a little younger than Emma and Aaron, who were spending their summer with her parents in Idaho. We ended up spending a lot of time together, sharing stories over dinner, laughing late into the night, and occasionally sharing a bed. Emma caught on quickly. Dad's got a girlfriend, she teased more than once, her grin wide and playful. I laughed it off, but there was something to it. Lisa and I exchanged contact info when the cruise ended, promising to keep in touch through email and Skype. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but we talked at least twice a week. Back at home, life slowly adjusted without Megan. My boss was flexible, letting me manage the school drop-offs and pickups without any hassle. Aaron wasn't far from getting his driver's license, which meant he'd soon be able to take over some of that responsibility. A couple of weeks after we got back from the cruise, George showed up at my door with a grim expression. They're putting Megan in a mental health facility, he said, his voice low. I felt my stomach twist. Why? George sighed and glanced away. Emma sent her a picture from the cruise. The one of you and that lady Lisa at dinner. She didn't take it well. Rachel found her in the tub, pills and alcohol. I blinked, struggling to find words. Jesus, I can't believe it. She survived, George added quickly, but the doctors say she needs constant care. Rhonda and I tried, but we can't keep up with her 24/7. She's better off in a facility. I exhaled, feeling a strange mix of sympathy and something closer to justice. Maybe Megan was finally getting a taste of the pain I felt when I discovered her affair with Tyler. How long do they think she'll be there? I asked. Could be a few years, or it might be permanent, George replied with a tired shrug. We're just taking it one day at a time. If you need anything, help with the kids, money, just say the word, I told him. George gave me a grateful smile. Thanks, Caleb. I appreciate it. Meanwhile, Lisa and I kept up our long-distance conversations. With every call, I found myself looking forward to hearing from her more and more. One night, as we were chatting over Skype, Lisa leaned closer to the camera and smiled. You know, you should bring the kids up sometime, she said. I've got a place up here you might like. Two-story log house out in the woods, north of Kamloops. It's peaceful, lots of space. I smirked. You trying to lure me into the wilderness, eh? Lisa laughed. Something like that. But seriously, I think you'd love it up here. And the kids could use a break too. I thought about it for a second. I'd never been that far north, but the idea didn't sound half bad. Maybe we'll take you up on that, I replied. Lisa raised her glass toward the screen. I'll hold you to it. Where it goes from here? Well, that's a story for another day.